Hi, this is Jack from Maths Forge, and in today's lesson we're going to be doing trigonometry to find angles. So before we start learning about the functions in trigonometry, we need to be aware of the sides of a right angle triangle. So here we have a right angle triangle and an angle theta over here, and the three sides are known as the following. The side directly opposite the angle that you are dealing with in the question is the opposite side. So this side can actually change from question to question. If theta was actually this top angle here, then the bottom side would be the opposite. But in this case, because theta is at the bottom right hand corner here, then the opposite side to it is funnily enough known as the opposite side. The longest side of the right angle triangle, the hypotenuse, is always facing the right angle, and this will never change. The adjacent side is the third side. So once you've determined your opposite side and your hypotenuse, the remaining side is the adjacent side. Commit this to memory because you're going to need it for every single question in trigonometry. So now let's look at the functions in trigonometry. We have our first function, sine. And sine works on an angle and it produces the following: the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. And I'm just abbreviating the opposite and the hypotenuse side to save us time writing. The next trigonometric function is cos or cosine, and this also works on an angle to produce the following: the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the third trigonometric function is tan or tangent, and this works on an angle to produce the following: the opposite over the adjacent. Now, a very nice way to remember all three trigonometric functions is using this acronym: SOH CAH TOA. SOH CAH TOA. So sine of an angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse, cos of an angle is equal to the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse, and tan of an angle is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. So I know this seems like a lot to take in, but actually applying this is very straightforward. So let's actually use all of this information to solve this question here. Here we're being asked to find x to one decimal place, and in this case x is this angle over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is label my right angle triangle. Opposite this angle here is known as the opposite side, so I'm just going to call it op. This side here that's 100 centimeters is the longest side on my right angle triangle, and it's facing the right angle, so this is the hypotenuse. And finally, this third side is the adjacent. So we're looking for an angle, and they've given us two sides, the hypotenuse and the adjacent. Going through my trigonometric functions, which trigonometric function deals with the hypotenuse and the adjacent only? And in this case, it's cos. Cos of an angle is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So I've determined I'm going to be using cos to solve this problem. So cos of the angle in the question, in this case, they've labeled the angle x, even though to the right-hand side, I've written it as theta, the Greek letter theta. I'm going to write it as x here because this is what we're looking for. And cos of the angle is equal to the adjacent side, which we know to be 60 centimeters. So I'm just going to write 60 over the hypotenuse, which we know to be 100. And so now to actually find this angle x, you have to isolate it. You have to get it on its own. So the question is, how do we cancel out this cos that's next to it? Well, every function has its inverse function, and trigonometric functions are no different. In this case, the inverse or the opposite function of cos is known as arc cos, and it looks like this. It's a cos with a -1 at the top. This is not cos to the power of -1, so be careful with that. It's just the way we write the inverse of cos. So using arc cos to get rid of cos, this is how it works. I'm going to apply arc cos to both sides of this equation. The arc cos hitting the cos is just going to leave us with x, and the arc cos hitting the 60 over 100 looks like this. Now, before you input this into your calculator, make sure that your calculator is set to degrees. And you can tell if it's set to degrees if there's a little D icon on your calculator screen. So once you've confirmed that your calculator is set to degrees, we can input this into our calculator, exactly how it looks. And most of the time, to get arc cos on your calculator, you have to click on Shift and then cos. Putting this into our calculator, we get the following: x is equal to 53.1 degrees to the nearest decimal place. And if we check our answer, there it is. Now, if you commit to memorizing SOH CAH TOA, it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of hassle, and this is all you're going to have to recall when answering these types of questions. So Let's do a 2-star example using SOH CAH TOA. Here we're being asked to find x to 1 decimal place, and in this case x is this angle over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is label my right angle triangle. I have the side opposite the angle, which is known as the opposite side, so I'm just going to call it op. We have the hypotenuse, which is the side opposite the right angle. There is no number here, so I'm not even actually going to label it. I'm just going to label the sides that we're working with or we have. And then the remaining side is the adjacent. So I'm going to call it ADJ. Now you have O, the opposite, and A, the adjacent. So which trigonometric function are we going to be using? Well, the trigonometric function with O and J is TOA. So it's tan. And this is the trigonometric function that we're going to need to solve this problem. So we're going to have tan of the angle. And in this case, the angle has been labeled as X. And this is going to be equal to the opposite side. So TOA, O is first, the opposite side, which in this case is 121.2, over the second letter, which is A, the adjacent. And in this case, the adjacent is 70. Now, just as we did in the previous example, to get rid of tan or to cancel tan out, we have to use the inverse function of tan, which in this case is going to be arctan. And it looks like tan, but with a -1 there. And we're going to apply this to both sides of the equation. Applying arctan to tan cancels it out, leaving us just with x. And this is going to be equal to arctan being applied from the left-hand side to 121.2 over 70. Inputting this into our calculator, we get the following: 60.0 degrees to the nearest decimal place. And if we check our answer, there it is. So let's do a 3-star example. Here we're being asked to find x to 1 decimal place. And in this case, x is the angle. So the first thing that you do is you write out SOH CAH TOA. The second thing that you do is begin labeling your right angle triangle. So the side opposite the angle that we're dealing with, this x, is the opposite side. But since there is no number here, I'm not even going to label it. The longest side in the right angle triangle is the side opposite the right angle, so it's this 220 here. And I'm just going to call it h for the hypotenuse. And the remaining side is known as the adjacent, so I'm just going to call it a. So we're dealing with h and a. Which trigonometric function has h and a? This is CAH, cos. So this is the trigonometric function we're going to be using. So now we can set up an equation. Cos of the angle that we're dealing with, which has been labeled as x, is equal to a over h. So the adjacent side in this case is 160.4 over h, which is in this case 220. Cancelling out the cos by applying an arc cos, the inverse of cos, to both sides, leaves us with x is equal to arc cos of 160.4 over 220. Putting this into our calculator, we get the following: 43.2 degrees to 1 decimal place. And if we check our answer, there it is. So the thing about trigonometry and when it comes to solving questions is you have to know your trigonometric functions. And SOH CAH TOA I found to be one of the best ways to do it. If you know SOH CAH TOA but you don't know how to label the right angle triangle, then that's a massive problem. Learn how to label the correct sides on a right angle triangle and then commit SOH CAH TOA to memory. Practice over and over again and you will master this topic. And that's it for the lesson on trigonometry and finding angles.